Thank you, Deacon. Thank you, Bushra. And look, thank you to everyone for the presentations thus far. It's been hugely inspiring. Damien may have left now, but the previous presentations have all been really brilliant. So thank you to you all. And I should say, as an organisation, we operate to an extent quite centrally in terms of government lobbying. I'll introduce us in a second, but it's massively inspiring to see such a huge grassroots campaign effectively and the impact that it has. So yeah, really thus far inspired and pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm just going to share my screen and do a short presentation that's not super long. It'll cover some things we've talked about already tonight and perhaps some new things as well, but join the dots. And echoing what Damien was just saying, will really, in summary, be about seeing what we can do together and seeing how we as an organisation can help. Yeah, so I'm Campaigns Manager at Campaign for Better Transport. We are the leading national charity for sustainable transport and the only one covering all modes. We've been around for over 50 years, founded in 1973 as Transport 2000. So those of you who've been in the transport world for a long time may recognise that name as well. We changed our name for obvious reasons after the turn of the millennium to Campaign for Better Transport. We have been, as I say, a leading authoritative voice on policy development and public campaigning for 50 years. So we sit between government, national government, local government, the transport industry and the public. And really we have a very high impact for what effectively is a small organisation in terms of numbers of people. Our vision is for all communities to have access to high quality, sustainable transport that meets their needs, improves quality of life and protects the environment. Of course, we make the case for better, greener, fairer transport and those benefits that it brings to the environment, to well-being, social equity, health, and to business, which we've talked about importantly today. Just a quick overview of recent campaign successes, an example of some of the things that we can do. So we lobbied successfully last year for a £2 national bus fare cap. And as many of you will know, that's been implemented 3 times successfully. So that was a big success. Another one slightly longer term, and that really pertains to what we're talking about here, is actually on railway station and line reopenings. So we have fed into the Restoring Your Railway Fund, which is a government fund, which has been very impactful in reopening many of the branch lines that were closed in the 60s. And in fact, we were founded when we started in 1973. It was to a large extent in response to those branch line closures and proposals to close a lot more branch lines. And that's a really huge part of our work. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Also, rail fares and ticketing reform. We make the case for simplification and fairer rail fares and ticketing. We've done a big piece of work on that recently, and we're working closely with the government. We're chairing a working group with DfT, with the GBR transition team, that's Great British Railways transition team, Trainline, all the major stakeholders in the rail sector to work on improving the fares and ticketing offer to passengers. Because as you will undoubtedly know and have felt, the cost of travelling by train has gone up at twice the cost of driving, and that's no use to anyone, and there are many other details within that. A big one as well last year was saving the day travel card, and thank you to Kent County Council for your involvement in that. In fact, you were a big stakeholder in that. And this was, of course, not a London-centric thing whatsoever, but for people who travel in and out of London. And as you'll know, the discount that you will either receive from the travel card agreement is significant. When you add that onto your ticket in and out of London, you get your travel card at a discount price. That was going to be cut in January. We saw that risk and we decided to intervene, and we brought together the Department for Transport, Rail Delivery Group and Transport for London and managed to negotiate for that travel card to be saved for 14 million people who use it every year. That includes disabled passengers and school groups and young people and elderly passengers as well who would have lost that. So that was a big win last year. Example of some of our research. So there's the Fair Future Report, Fares and Ticketing, a business paper we did last year as well, Pay As You Drive paper, Transport Deserts, which is on transport inequality and social exclusion, the future of rail and expanding the railways. The last one on that list is really about the reopening railways, as I mentioned earlier. That's just a cross-section. There are many, many more papers where that comes from. Research is a big part of what we do. So on reopening rail, our 27 report, Expanding the Railways, How to Deliver and Develop a Proposal to Reopen Your Railways, was a big collaboration between ourselves, Department for Transport and Rail Future. And there was a follow-up 2 years later, which called for a national programme of rail reopenings, identifying disused lines that should be first priority. Using a new methodology, we rated lines for their viability and the economic and environmental benefits they'd bring if reopened. this has been successful. Again, for those of you who follow transport around the country, you may know that a couple of years ago, the Dartmoor line was reopened, Oakhampton Station. There are many more stations being reopened. And next year, I'll just show a slide, the Northumberland line will be reopened in Ashington and Blythe, which is going to be very exciting. There's a bit of a quote from the opening. That's Peter Wilkinson, Managing Director of Passenger Services at the Department for Transport, from that paper. So here's just a map of the Northumberland line. This is an old freight line, which is being reopened for passenger use after having been closed for over 40 years. So I just wanted to put that out there as an example of the fact that we can get stuff done, and we'd like to get stuff done for you. So quick summary of the challenges as we see them. Of course, Department for Transport are a challenge. And it happens that yesterday, myself and my colleague went into the Department for Transport and had a meeting with Andrea Pearson, who is Head of International in the department, and her colleague, and had a very useful meeting. We covered some of the issues that we've talked about today and that Damon was just talking about. Of course, the European entry and exit system is going to be a huge challenge over the next 18 months. It's a concerning time for all. HS1, we also meet frequently with HS1 and GetLink, and they, of course, HS1, their priority is to get more entrants onto the line, but they are aware that the EEES will be a huge challenge. So Department for Transport, really, we talked about Ashford and Fleet with them yesterday, Head of International, and, you know, their line at the moment is it doesn't seem viable. And they state, of course, as we've discussed, that they have limited number of border staff and they can't justify putting some down at Ashford and Fleet at this point. Eurostar also are a challenge and obstacle as discussed in terms of making the business case and their debt recovery, which we're seeing reflected in much higher fares than previously. Then there's the European entry and exit system, and of course, longer term political will. Do we really want this? Do the decision makers really want to see this happen? That's where we hope to come in handy. Opportunities, of course, and as mentioned, the tunnel capacity is really not being maximised whatsoever. If anything, in fact, in discussions yesterday with the Director of International, it's at about 50%. That's quite extraordinary. Now, of course, that's overall. That's not within some of the concentrated periods when people travel, but there is potentially 50% more in terms of train paths that could be used. So there's potential here. While it's a very tricky period right now, if we're thinking medium to long term, it's potentially a very exciting period if that capacity can really be used. Then another opportunity, of course, is the new entrants. We've talked about Evolyn and Huero. There's also Renfe and potentially another couple of new entrants who are interested in getting involved. So they're really very significant, I think, in terms of engaging them, persuading them of the business case. The issue is, and again, this is something we found out yesterday or had confirmed yesterday in our meeting with Andrea, was that some of them are not as developed as previous potential entrants have been. Some of them, I think Huero, for example, barely have a website. They're in very early stages. Evolyn maybe further on. Renfe, of course, are a Spanish operator, so they're already set up in many respects. So there's work to be done there, but it's a huge possibility. An opportunity, I should say there, that's that we can help. So Campaign for Better Transport, we can do research, we can do a briefing on the model that we've used for reopening rail or expanding the railways, and that can certainly help. And I'll talk about that a little more later on. And then finally here, Stratford International. And this is something that the department actually would like us to potentially do some work on. Stratford International is sitting there unused. The French authorities have set everything up in terms of border and infrastructure. It's ready to go. That's a bit of a kind of, a bit of a missed opportunity, but an existing opportunity. If we can make the case, particularly for these new entrants, to use Stratford, now this is where it gets interesting, then this could really be a successful way to get Ashford and Fleet reopened. The thing is, at the moment, we know that Eurostar are not keen on competition. They've got a default monopoly on GetLink in the tunnel, and they're not really keen on competition. However, if those competitors could really brand the thing themselves, Stratford International as their own line, people would start talking about, for example, I'm going to take the, I'll take the whatever it's called, I'll take the Renfe from Stratford, or I'll take the Huero from Stratford, I'll take the Eurostar from St Pancras. At that point, they might not even need to both go out of the same London station for a while. So there's real potential there to make the case for reopening Stratford, or indeed opening Stratford. Yes, on this front, in terms of the benefits of open access, it's just useful, I think, just to remind ourselves of how open access is succeeding on other lines in the UK, most notably on the East Coast Main Line, where LNER, Grand Central and Hull trains are the only operators with the passenger numbers back up to or surpassing pre-pandemic levels. And that's largely thanks to those open access operators, which is Lumo and Grand Central. Hull trains are on there, by the way, because Lumo are part of Hull trains. So the second bullet point there, the ECML, the East Coast Main Line open access impact on shifting journeys from air to rail. That's been huge. So there's been an over 50% shift of mode share, and this is, of course, hugely important to us as a sustainable transport organisation, from air to rail on that East Coast line, London to Edinburgh. It used to be a majority that would take the plane for those direct London to Edinburgh trips. It's really flipped thanks to that open access aspect. Grand Union, of course, are also offering a potential for a West Coast Main Line open access route up round to Stirling. We've some reservations about that because they're looking at diesel trains, but nevertheless, it's positive overall. So on the last point there, we need to talk more and more about international rail, about Euro trains and not the Eurostar, really this wider picture. Our offer, therefore, to the campaign is, if we can be of assistance in research and lobbying, we'd like to. I should say it would be helpful to us to have the business funding partners as part of that, and I know that offer has always been already been asked for business support, and it would make sense from our point of view, from everyone's point of view, if there are businesses really making the case, for example, for Stratford, for example, for one of these new entrants, right? So if there are businesses in the area who really would like to be involved with us in making the case, we're not talking huge amounts, but it could be huge in terms of impact. That would be great to work with you on that. APPG engagement, we do engage in the rail APPG, that's the all-party parliamentary group often, and some of the other rail-related APPGs. I don't believe there's an international rail APPG. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's not and there's capacity to set one up, Damien's left now, but perhaps with his involvement, we'd be keen to look into that potentially if there's capacity to do that. It's the sort of thing that we can do. We did set one up recently for a transport desert, as it were, excluded communities APPG. So we can do that sort of thing, and that can be very helpful. Roundtables and events, again, we can chair those, we can set them up, we can run those, we can be part of those, and they can be very useful. We find it quite straightforward to get involvement from the ministers, the rail ministers we meet with frequently. Currently, Mark Harper and Hugh Merriman. We meet frequently with them and their special advisors. Likewise, the shadow team. At the moment, it's twice weekly with the shadow rail minister, Stephen Morgan, and we'd be very, very keen to be involved in roundtables.
Michael, we'll have to sort of bring you. It's absolutely brilliant, and thank you very much for what you've presented so far.
Pleasure. Yeah, to round up, no worries. I think I'm there then. That's pretty much it. So yeah, this is the last slide. So yeah, just to say, we are developing an international rail program overall, which is looking at passenger and freight and the Stratford element, and we'd love to incorporate Ashford and Ebbsfleet into that very much, and then the associated media that would go with that and all that we do. We do have great links with media, and things we talk about tend to get picked up. So that's our offer to you.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much.